Sofia Ramirez stood at the window of her sprawling Beverly Hills mansion, staring out at the city lights below. The golden glow of the Los Angeles skyline seemed distant, almost foreign to her. She had everything anyone could dream of: wealth, beauty, and a life of luxury, but none of it filled the emptiness she felt inside. At 28, Sofia was married to Mateo Ramirez, a man who, by all outward appearances, seemed perfect. He was a successful entrepreneur in the construction industry, admired by colleagues, respected by peers, and loved by the public. But behind the polished image of their perfect marriage, Sofia was slowly suffocating. Her life had been mapped out for her. Mateo had swept her off her feet when she was young, promising her excitement, stability, and a life of adventure. At first, everything had felt like a dream. They had traveled the world together, attending exclusive galas and enjoying a lifestyle most people only saw in movies. But after the honeymoon phase faded, something had shifted. Mateo's demanding work schedule became a constant, and his frequent business trips left Sofia isolated in a house that echoed with silence. The grand estate in Beverly Hills, with its marble floors, towering ceilings, and sprawling gardens, should have felt like a sanctuary, but to Sofia, it felt more like a gilded cage. She had everything material wealth could offer, but no one to share it with. Mateo was often away on business trips, his presence in her life reduced to a few brief moments here and there, too infrequent to satisfy the deeper hunger for emotional connection that Sofia craved. In the beginning, Sofia had occupied her time with endless charity events, boutique shopping sprees, and coffee dates with her friends, trying to fill the hollow space that Mateo's absence had left. But soon, even the glamour of her lifestyle began to wear thin. The high-end boutiques lost their allure, the charity galas felt like rehearsed performances, and the small talk with friends became increasingly meaningless. She found herself feeling restless, longing for something more, something real, something fulfilling. She couldn't ignore the fact that she was slowly becoming a stranger to herself. Her loneliness didn't go unnoticed. Her family and friends whispered behind her back, questioning whether Mateo was aware of her unhappiness. They noticed the vacant look in her eyes, the quiet moments when she seemed lost in thought, as though she were searching for something she couldn't quite grasp. They wondered why she stayed in a marriage that seemed so perfect from the outside, yet so empty on the inside. Sofia knew she couldn't continue down this path forever. She wanted more, she deserved more. But she was trapped, not by the walls of her mansion, but by her own fear of being alone. She couldn't leave Mateo, not when her whole life had been built around him. She was a woman on the edge, lost between loyalty and the suffocating weight of her own desires. And then, as if the universe had heard her silent plea, someone else entered her life, someone who would change everything. This opening sets the stage for Sofia's emotional conflict, highlighting her inner turmoil, the coldness of her marriage, and the growing sense of isolation that she feels despite her outwardly perfect life. It introduces the key elements of wealth, loneliness, and longing for connection, all of which will play a significant role in shaping her actions moving forward. The first time Felix Ramirez walked into her life, Sofia had no idea how deeply her world would be affected. It was a late afternoon in early spring, the sun casting a warm golden light across the rolling hills of their Beverly Hills estate. Sofia was alone, as usual. Mateo had just left for another week-long business trip. It had become routine, his departures, her isolation. But that afternoon, Felix, Mateo's father, arrived at the house unannounced. Felix was everything Sofia had been missing in her life. At 55, he carried an aura of power, refined charm, and quiet authority that captivated everyone around him. Tall and impeccably dressed, he had a magnetic presence that made people listen when he spoke, even without trying. Unlike Mateo, who was often too preoccupied with his work to notice the subtle details, Felix saw things, felt things, that others missed. Their initial conversation was innocuous enough. Felix had come to check on Sofia, to offer his company while Mateo was away. He had a way of making her feel seen in a way that no one else had in years. Over tea on the veranda, their conversations danced from topics of travel to art, from the latest news to their shared memories of family holidays. What began as small talk quickly evolved into something deeper. Felix, ever the astute observer, noticed the loneliness in Sophia's eyes, a quiet sorrow she had learned to hide well. "You've always been an extraordinary woman, Sophia," Felix said one evening, after listening intently to her speak about her dreams and frustrations. His voice was smooth, deep, with a warmth that seemed to draw her in. "But it seems to me that you're living in a world of your own making. A world where everything is perfect on the outside, but there's a different reality underneath." Sophia froze, the words hitting her harder than she had anticipated. How did he know? She wasn't ready to confront the emptiness that had taken over her life, yet here was Felix, uncovering it with just a few simple words. Their connection deepened slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Felix would visit more often, always under the pretense of checking in on her, offering support during the long stretches of time Matteo was away. He would share stories of his younger days, of business ventures and the intricate politics of the world he inhabited. Each visit felt like an escape from the suffocating silence of her own existence. But it wasn't just the conversations that drew Sophia in. It was the way Felix looked at her, not just as a wife, but as a woman. The way his eyes lingered just a moment longer than necessary, the slight tilt of his head when he spoke to her, the subtle compliments he offered, crafted not to flatter, but to validate. It was a validation Sophia hadn't realized she was starving for. By late summer, Felix's visits became more frequent. There were moments when Sophia found herself laughing freely, genuinely enjoying his company. It felt liberating, like stepping out from a shadow into the sun. He made her feel alive, seen, understood, all the things she had longed for in her marriage with Matteo but had never been able to express. One evening, after a glass of wine shared over dinner, Felix made a suggestion that would change everything. "Why don't we take a short trip together?" he asked casually, his eyes glinting with a hint of mischief. "Just the two of us. No one would know. A quiet little getaway. You deserve it, Sophia." At first, she hesitated. The idea seemed reckless, dangerous even. But the thought of escaping, of stepping away from the monotony of her life, was too tempting to resist. She agreed. The trip, to a secluded hotel in the hills outside of Santa Monica, was their first real escape. Felix was attentive, charming, and affectionate in ways that Matteo never had been. Every word, every gesture, made Sophia feel as if she was the center of his world. What began as a fleeting flirtation morphed into something much deeper, more consuming. Their chemistry was undeniable, and soon, it was no longer just about the escape, it was about the connection they shared. Sophia found herself caught in a whirlwind, intoxicated by the attention and the thrill of being desired by someone who seemed to understand her in ways that Matteo never could. But as their affair continued, a darker side of Felix began to emerge. His affection for her, which had initially felt like a breath of fresh air, began to feel more like a chain. Felix, though charming, was not just a man who adored her, he was a man who demanded her attention, who expected her compliance. His control was subtle at first, wrapped in compliments and sweet words, but it soon became evident that he was no longer just offering her affection, he was making her dependent on it. "You know," Felix would say, his hand lightly resting on hers, "I can't imagine Matteo ever giving you the attention you deserve. He's a good man, but he's too caught up in his world to truly see you." Sophia didn't want to admit it, but he was right. Matteo's absence had left a void, one that Felix was now filling, but in doing so, he was also beginning to occupy more of her mind, more of her heart. She was torn between the guilt of betraying her husband and the undeniable pull of the intense connection she felt with Felix. But by then, it was too late. She was in too deep. Each meeting, each stolen moment with Felix, seemed to erode the boundaries she had once set for herself. The affair wasn't just about the desire for excitement, it was about the psychological pull Felix had over her. He had become her escape, her validation, her drug. Sophia was no longer just lost in her marriage, now, she was lost in Felix, in a web of lies, manipulation, and an emotional dependency she didn't know how to break. And as the months passed, she found herself standing at the precipice of a dangerous reality, one that would soon have far-reaching consequences for them all. This section deepens the complexity of Sophia's relationship with Felix, exploring their growing emotional and psychological connection, as well as the manipulation Felix begins to exert over her. It sets the stage for the unfolding drama, highlighting the tension between Sophia's need for validation and the increasing control Felix has over her, making it clear that this affair is no longer just about love, but about power and dependency. As the weeks passed, the relationship between Sophia and Felix began to spiral beyond their control. What started as innocent conversations and stolen moments of affection had grown into something much darker, something neither of them could fully comprehend at first. Felix's influence over Sophia intensified. His presence was like a shadow that loomed over her life, suffocating yet magnetic. Every glance he gave her, every word he spoke, seemed to bind her closer to him, weaving a web of emotional manipulation that she couldn't easily escape. Sophia began to feel as if she were living in two different worlds. By day, she maintained the facade of the perfect wife in front of her friends and social circles. She attended charity events with Matteo, smiled for the cameras, and participated in the same monotonous routines. But by night, when Matteo was away and the house was empty, she became someone else, someone who craved Felix's attention and approval more than anything else. His words began to resonate in her mind, pushing away the guilt she had once felt. "You deserve to feel wanted, Sophia," Felix would say, his tone smooth, coaxing. "Matteo is a good man, but he doesn't see you the way I do. I can give you what he can't." His words seeped into her subconscious, feeding the doubts she had always harbored about her marriage. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little Matteo actually knew her. Felix made her feel seen, heard, and above all, desired in a way that Matteo never could. Slowly, she began to justify the affair, telling herself that Felix was the only one who truly understood her. The power dynamic shifted. Felix no longer just visited, his presence became constant. He would show up unexpectedly, his visits now carrying a sense of urgency and possessiveness. He had become a fixture in her life, a constant that Sophia couldn't seem to push away, even if she wanted to. What had once been a secret indulgence became an addiction. Every time Felix left, Sophia felt an emptiness so profound that it lingered long after he was gone. She needed him, in a way that terrified her. But Felix's control over Sophia began to take on a darker tone. His attentiveness, once comforting, now felt suffocating. He started to dictate her movements, subtly pulling the strings of her life without her even realizing it. He would tell her when to smile, when to look a certain way, when to be quiet and obedient. Each meeting felt like a test of her loyalty, and every time she passed, it only deepened her entanglement. "You're so beautiful when you listen to me," Felix would whisper in her ear, his fingers grazing her skin. "When you let go of your fears and give yourself to me, you'll understand what true freedom feels like." Sophia, already vulnerable from the isolation she had endured, found herself slowly unraveling. The excitement of their meetings, once thrilling, was now mixed with a sense of dread. She no longer knew if she was in love with Felix, or if she was simply terrified of being without him. It was a twisted dependency, one that made her feel alive and dead at the same time. Then came the night that shattered everything. Felix invited her to meet him in a secluded part of town, far away from the prying eyes of their social circles. He had grown impatient with their secret life, and now, he wanted to escalate things, to take their connection to a point of no return. Sophia hesitated but couldn't resist the pull. She arrived at the small, dimly lit hotel, her heart racing as she stepped into the shadowy lobby. Felix was already there, waiting for her with a glass of wine in hand, his expression unreadable. "You're mine now, Sophia," he said as he took her hand, his fingers tightening around hers. "You have no idea how much I've wanted this." But something was different that night. There was an edge to Felix's demeanor that made Sophia uneasy. The control he once had over her seemed to shift into something darker, something dangerous. She felt a growing discomfort in her chest, but the emotional hold Felix had over her made it hard to resist. As the night wore on, Felix's behavior grew more possessive. He was no longer the charming, attentive man she had fallen for, he was cold, demanding, and increasingly controlling. The atmosphere in the room grew tense, and Sophia could sense that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. She had begun to see cracks in the facade of their relationship, but she was too deep in to pull away now. It was then that the first twist hit, a phone call, a simple phone call that changed the course of everything. Sophia's phone buzzed loudly on the nightstand. The caller ID read Matteo. Her heart sank. Felix's expression darkened as Sophia hesitated, staring at the phone. Felix, never one to show vulnerability, grew tense. The sight of her husband's name on the screen was like a trigger, a reminder that this affair was far from over, that the consequences were imminent. Felix, in a moment of cruel frustration, grabbed the phone and crushed it under his foot. "You're mine, Sophia. You're not going back," he growled, his face contorted in anger. Sophia recoiled, the sense of dread flooding back in full force. What had started as a thrilling escape had morphed into something far more sinister. Felix wasn't just a lover, he had become her captor. She stood frozen, realizing the depth of the trap she was caught in. Felix's manipulation had gone too far. His influence, once intoxicating, was now suffocating. But what could she do? How could she break free? As the reality of her situation set in, Sophia's thoughts turned to Matteo. She had been so focused on her emotional dependency on Felix that she had failed to notice how much she was losing. What had started as a search for love had become a perilous game of manipulation, and now, the consequences of her choices were closer than ever. The twists that had been building, the lies, the manipulation, the control, were all about to collide in a way that Sophia had never anticipated. And the shocking truth of who would pay the price was still hidden in the shadows, waiting to come to light. This section delves deeper into the escalating dynamics of Sophia's relationship with Felix, highlighting the dangerous shift from affection to manipulation. The twists introduce the emotional conflict and the growing awareness of Sophia's entrapment, setting the stage for the inevitable consequences that will follow. It was a morning like any other, until it wasn't. Sophia woke to the sound of her phone vibrating relentlessly on the nightstand. She groggily reached for it, only to see the news flashing across her screen: Felix Ramirez, dead. The shock was immediate, her heart pounding in her chest as the words sank in. The message came from a family member, followed by a phone call from Matteo, whose voice sounded tight with disbelief and confusion. "Felix, he's dead, Sophia. They found him in his study. It's not good. The police are here." Matteo's voice trembled on the other end. "I need you to stay here. Don't leave." The room seemed to spin as she dropped the phone onto the bed, her mind racing. What happened? How? She had just seen Felix the night before, and now he was dead. Sophia felt a cold sweat bead on her forehead, but she didn't know why. Was it guilt? Fear? The terrible, unshakable feeling that somehow, she had contributed to this? The news hit hard, but it was just the beginning. By the time the police arrived, the mansion was surrounded by flashing lights and hushed whispers from neighbors. Sophia sat motionless in the living room as Matteo paced frantically, exchanging words with the detectives. The gravity of the situation was sinking in, but there was no turning back now. Felix was gone. The scene was being processed by the authorities, and Sophia was at the center of it all, whether she liked it or not. When the detective finally turned his attention to her, she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical pressure. His eyes were sharp, analyzing, and Sophia couldn't shake the sensation that everything she had done, every secret she had buried, was now laid bare. "Mrs. Ramirez," Detective Harris said, his voice calm yet stern, "we need to ask you a few questions. Please come with us." Sophia stood up, her legs shaking beneath her, and followed the detective out of the room, her mind a blur of confusion and guilt. The images from the previous night kept flooding her thoughts. Felix had been so insistent. He had become more aggressive, more demanding, almost unrecognizable from the man she had once sought solace in. The phone call from Mateo had jolted her from the trance she had been in. The quiet hotel room had become a battleground, and Felix's once intoxicating touch had turned cold and controlling. But how had it all escalated? Had things gone too far? As she sat in the interrogation room, the detective's questions began to cut through her defenses. "When was the last time you saw Mr. Ramirez?" I saw him last night," Sophia replied, her voice trembling. "We had dinner. We talked. I left early. I went back home. Can anyone confirm your whereabouts after that?" Sophia paused, the question catching her off guard. She had lied so easily, so many times, but now it seemed like the truth was slipping through her fingers. She hesitated before answering. "I went back home to my house in Beverly Hills. I stayed there." The detective nodded, taking notes. His expression remained neutral, but Sophia couldn't help feeling that he didn't believe her. It wasn't just the questions, it was the way they were asked, the way his eyes kept narrowing as if he already knew more than he was letting on. "And what exactly were you doing last night? Was there anything unusual?" "Nothing unusual, detective. I was just spending time with Felix. Talking." As the investigation continued, details began to emerge that Sophia hadn't expected. The forensic team had found signs of a struggle in Felix's study. The chair where he had been sitting was overturned, and there were signs that he had fought back, something that made the detective's expression darken even more. Felix had been stabbed multiple times, and there were traces of blood outside the study, suggesting he had tried to escape, to reach someone, to stop whatever had happened. Sophia's heart sank as the details unfolded. Could it be? Could she have been the one to push Felix to this point? She had never meant for it to go this far. The guilt began to consume her as she realized the possibility that her actions, her affair, her dependency on him, might have led to something far worse than betrayal. Felix's control over her had clouded her judgment, and now, she was left to pick up the pieces of a life that was shattering before her eyes. The police didn't believe her initial story. The inconsistencies began to stack up. Her phone records told a different story. The detectives found that Sophia's phone had been pinged near Felix's estate long after she claimed to have returned home. And then there were the text messages, the hidden conversations between Sophia and Felix, revealing the deeper layers of manipulation and emotional coercion she had been subjected to. The investigation rapidly shifted its focus onto her. They asked about the nature of her relationship with Felix. The questions became more pointed, more direct, until it was clear, Sophia was no longer just a witness. She was a suspect. Sophia tried to remain calm, but every question, every accusation, felt like a tightening noose. Her mind raced with thoughts of how to defend herself, how to explain the tangled mess she had gotten herself into. Felix's death couldn't have been planned, not by her. Yet, everything about their relationship had been tainted with lies and deceit. Had she pushed him too far? Had her own betrayal led to a tragic end? The mounting evidence seemed to close in on her. The authorities weren't convinced by her alibi, and the deeper they dug into her relationship with Felix, the more they discovered about her emotional vulnerability and the psychological manipulation she had suffered. What had started as an affair driven by loneliness and desire had become something much darker, something neither Sophia nor Felix had fully understood until it was too late. And now, as the investigation swirled around her, Sophia knew that there was no escape from the consequences of her actions, no way to undo the twisted path she had walked down. The crime had occurred, but its true nature was only beginning to unfold. The twists and turns in the investigation would reveal secrets she had tried so desperately to bury. And in the end, no one would walk away untouched by the truth. This section focuses on the aftermath of Felix's death, the investigation that follows, and Sophia's increasing sense of guilt and entrapment. The mounting evidence, her inconsistent alibi, and the growing suspicion from the police set the stage for the unfolding drama, as Sophia is forced to confront the consequences of her actions. The days that followed Felix's death felt like a blur to Sophia. The police had their sights firmly set on her, and despite her insistence on her innocence, the weight of suspicion was undeniable. She spent her days at home, isolated, with only her thoughts to keep her company. Every knock on the door, every phone call made her stomach drop, but nothing compared to the moment the formal charges were laid. Sophia's arrest came quietly, with no media frenzy, no grand spectacle. But the moment the handcuffs clicked into place, her life as she knew it came to an end. She was charged with second-degree murder in the death of Felix Ramirez. The accusation felt surreal, as if it couldn't possibly be true. How had she gone from a wife seeking validation to a woman accused of murder? Her lawyer, a sharp-minded woman named Rebecca Daniels, advised her to remain silent. "The more you say, the more they'll twist it," Rebecca warned, her voice steady but tinged with worry. "We need to play this carefully. The evidence against you is mounting, but it's circumstantial. If we can get you to trial, we might stand a chance." But Sophia knew that the chances of walking away unscathed were slim. As the days passed, the evidence against her seemed to grow stronger. Phone records showed her near Felix's estate long after she claimed to have gone home. The text messages, once private and secretive, were now public and damning. The police had found records of heated arguments between them, messages filled with jealousy, manipulation, and veiled threats. The detectives had pieced together a picture of a woman caught in a toxic affair with a man who had emotionally ensnared her, a woman who might have snapped under the pressure. The trial began in early December 2018, and from the moment the courtroom doors opened, Sophia's world was never the same. The press, cameras flashing, crowded the hallways. The once private affair between her and Felix had become the subject of national scrutiny. News outlets speculated about her motives, her mental state, and every possible angle. The public couldn't get enough of the tragic love story gone wrong. They painted her as the perfect victim of an overbearing, manipulative man, but the prosecution was determined to show a different side of the story. The prosecution's case was airtight. They painted Sophia as a woman who had grown dissatisfied with her marriage and turned to Felix for attention. But instead of a harmless affair, they suggested that her relationship with him had turned toxic and manipulative. Felix, they argued, had become obsessed with Sophia and controlled her emotionally. In return, she had become emotionally dependent on him. Then, they dropped the bombshell. The prosecutor, a sharp man named James Harper, stood up and read a series of messages from Felix to Sophia that painted a chilling picture of their relationship. One message stood out above all the others. "If you ever try to leave me, I'll tell Mateo everything. And I'll make sure you regret it." Sophia's breath caught in her throat as she heard those words, the very words that had haunted her since that fateful night. Felix had threatened to expose their affair. The prosecutors argued that Sophia, in a fit of desperation and fear of her secret being revealed, had taken matters into her own hands. The prosecution built its case around the idea that Sophia had murdered Felix to protect herself from exposure, to save her marriage, and to escape Felix's hold on her. Sophia's defense, however, told a different story. Rebecca Daniels, a woman known for her unflinching determination, argued that Sophia was a victim, a victim of emotional abuse, of manipulation, and of a man who had slowly twisted her into a person she barely recognized. She painted Felix as a master manipulator who had preyed on Sophia's vulnerabilities, using his charm and power to control her every move. Sophia, she argued, had been under constant pressure, unable to escape the toxic dynamic they shared. "What we are seeing here is not a woman scorned, but a woman who has been broken," Rebecca said in her opening statement. "A woman who was trapped in a relationship where love and control were indistinguishable. A woman pushed to the brink, afraid of what Felix would do if she tried to break free. And when she did try, when she finally had the courage to walk away from him, it cost him his life." The defense argued that Sophia had never intended to kill Felix. They argued that his death had been a tragic accident, a consequence of the escalating tension between them. She had acted in self-defense, or, at the very least, in a moment of fear and confusion. The evidence, they said, was circumstantial, and there was no direct proof linking her to the murder. Felix's wounds, they claimed, could have been the result of a violent struggle, not premeditated murder. The courtroom was packed with spectators, and the tension in the air was palpable. Matteo sat at the front of the room, his face a mask of pain and confusion. He had never suspected his father's manipulations, and now he was forced to confront the truth about his wife, the woman he had trusted, the woman he had loved. His testimony was a devastating moment in the trial. He spoke of the woman he thought he knew, but his words were tinged with disbelief. "I loved Sophia," Matteo said, his voice shaking as he took the stand. "I still do. But I don't know who she is anymore. I don't know if I ever did." Sophia's heart broke as she heard those words. She had betrayed him, yes, but she had never imagined it would come to this. She had never imagined that the consequences of her actions would destroy not only her life but Matteo's as well. As the trial wore on, it became clear that the case was not just about a murder. It was about the unraveling of a family, the exposure of a dark and twisted relationship that had been hidden for far too long. The jury listened, the tension mounting with every new revelation. Everyone in the room could feel it, the crushing weight of Sophia's choices, the fragile threads of a marriage torn apart, and the twisted, tragic love story that had led to a man's death. The prosecution made its final statement, urging the jury to see the case for what it was, a woman who had killed out of fear, jealousy, and guilt. The defense, on the other hand, pleaded for mercy, urging the jury to see a broken woman who had been manipulated and victimized for far too long. The trial was nearing its conclusion, and all eyes were on the jury as they deliberated. Sophia sat in the courtroom, her body tense, her mind racing. She had never expected this, to be standing here, accused of murder, her life torn apart by her own choices. And as the jury filed back into the room, the air felt thick with anticipation. What would they decide? Would Sophia walk free, or would she be condemned for a crime she never meant to commit? This section builds on the drama and tension of the trial, presenting both sides of the case and the emotional turmoil that Sophia experiences as she is forced to confront the consequences of her actions. The stakes are high, with both personal and legal ramifications unfolding, and the courtroom drama sets the stage for the final resolution of Sophia's fate. The days after the closing arguments were a blur of tense anticipation. Sophia sat in her prison cell, the walls closing in around her, every tick of the clock echoing in the silence. Her lawyer, Rebecca Daniels, had fought fiercely to portray her as a victim, someone pushed too far, trapped in a relationship that had slowly consumed her. But no matter how much she had hoped for justice, the weight of the trial hung heavy on her heart. The evidence was against her, and her once perfect life now seemed like a distant memory. The courtroom was packed on the day the verdict was read. The air was thick with expectation, the murmurs of the crowd growing louder with each passing minute. Sophia, pale and still, sat between her lawyer and the bailiff, her hands clasped tightly together. Matteo, who had sat silently through much of the trial, was in the front row, his face a mask of pain and disbelief. His presence made Sophia's heart ache. She could feel his anger and hurt even from across the room. They were both shattered, torn apart by the actions she had taken, actions she never imagined would lead them to this point. The jury entered the courtroom, their faces solemn. The judge called the room to order, and then, the moment arrived. We, the jury, find the defendant, Sofia Ramirez, guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Felix Ramirez, the foreman declared, his voice cold, final. Sophia's heart stopped. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her mind struggled to grasp the enormity of what had just happened. Guilty. She had heard those words, but they didn't feel real. Her body shook with disbelief. She looked to Rebecca, whose face showed a flicker of disappointment but also an understanding. They had expected this. The weight of the verdict settled on her shoulders like a ton of bricks. It wasn't the death penalty, but it didn't matter. The verdict was a finality, a public acknowledgement of the destruction she had caused, to herself, to Mateo, to her family, and, most tragically, to Felix. The sentencing phase came just days later. The courtroom was quieter now, the tension still palpable. Sophia stood before the judge, her body hunched as if trying to shrink away from the reality of it all. The prosecution presented their case for sentencing, emphasizing the coldness of her actions and the premeditation they believed had been involved in Felix's death. James Harper, the prosecutor, stood with his papers in hand. The defendant showed no remorse. She planned and executed the murder of Felix Ramirez, a man who had only sought to love her. This crime was born out of betrayal, fear, and a selfish desire to protect herself from the truth. Her actions must be met with the full weight of the law. Sophia's lawyer, Rebecca, countered. Your Honor, my client was a victim herself. She was manipulated and emotionally abused by Felix for months, perhaps even longer. She was under his control, unable to see a way out. Yes, there was a tragic loss, but there was also a profound loss of her own humanity in this relationship. We ask that the court show mercy. But mercy was not to be granted. The judge, after a long pause, spoke, his voice firm but compassionate. The court finds that the defendant acted in a moment of desperation, but the consequences of her actions were grave. Given the circumstances of the crime, the manipulation involved, and the impact on the victim's family, I hereby sentence Sofia Ramirez to 20 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 15 years. The gavel came down, and with it, a part of Sofia's life was buried forever. The crowd in the courtroom murmured, some sympathetic, others filled with judgment. Mateo sat in the front row, his face a mixture of grief and anger. His world had been torn apart, and now, the woman he once loved was being locked away. The sentence was harsh, but it was also a reflection of the brokenness that had led to that moment. For Sofia, the reality of it all hit like a tidal wave. She had betrayed not only Mateo but herself. Her affair with Felix had started as an escape, but it had spiraled into something uncontrollable. The emotional manipulation she had endured had clouded her judgment, but now, as she faced the consequences, there was no turning back. As she was escorted from the courtroom, her hands bound by shackles, Sofia felt a deep sense of emptiness. The woman who had once been so full of life, so eager for love and validation, was now a prisoner, both of the law and of the choices she had made. There was no one left to turn to. Mateo, the man she had promised to love, was no longer in her life, his heart broken beyond repair. Her relationship with her family had crumbled, her reputation tarnished. The luxurious life she had once known was gone. In its place was only the harsh reality of a prison cell. For the next several years, Sofia would spend her days in isolation, grappling with the consequences of her choices. The time behind bars was both a punishment and a process of self-reflection. She had no illusions about the life she was now living, but in the quiet of her cell, Sofia began to understand the true cost of the decisions that had led her here. It wasn't just about the affair with Felix, it was about the emotional dependence that had clouded her judgment, the loss of self she had experienced over time. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, the Ramirez family tried to rebuild what had been broken. Mateo, once a man filled with hope and ambition, left Los Angeles soon after the trial. Unable to face the weight of the scandal and his shattered family, he moved away to start a new life, far from the shadows of his past. The family estate sat empty, a symbol of everything that had been lost. Sofia's story would be retold in the media for years, a cautionary tale of love, betrayal, and the consequences of being trapped in a toxic relationship. She became a symbol of both victimhood and guilt, her life a paradox of being both manipulated and manipulative. In the end, Sofia Ramirez was not just a woman who had committed a crime. She was a symbol of the complexities of the human heart, the dangerous depths of emotional manipulation, and the irrevocable consequences of choices made in desperation. This section delves deeply into the aftermath of Sofia's trial and conviction. It explores the legal consequences of her actions, the emotional and psychological toll it takes on her, and the ripple effect on the people around her, especially Mateo. The sentencing and the emotional fallout set the stage for Sofia's future and the irrevocable change in her life. Years had passed since the trial of Sofia Ramirez, and the once highly publicized case had faded from the media spotlight. Yet, its impact lingered, both in the hearts of those involved and in the wider societal consciousness. Sofia, now serving her sentence in a California state prison, had become a symbol, not of villainy, but of tragedy and loss. Her story of emotional manipulation, a toxic affair, and the irreversible consequences of her actions had sparked countless discussions in households, legal circles, and mental health forums alike. Her name was no longer just a whisper in the halls of justice, it had become synonymous with the dangers of manipulation in relationships, the psychological toll of being emotionally trapped, and the heartbreaking reality of a woman who had lost everything, including herself. The media, having moved on to the next sensational headline, still returned to Sofia's story time and time again, not just to retell the tale of a crime, but to reflect on its deeper implications. Sofia's trial had not just been a legal case, it had ignited conversations around the complexities of relationships, abuse, and mental health. In living rooms across America, people began to question how well they really knew the people they loved, and how even the most seemingly perfect relationships could be fraught with hidden darkness. Discussions about emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and controlling behavior became more prominent, especially in light of the ongoing #MeToo movement, which was gaining momentum during the time of Sofia's trial. At its core, Sofia's story raised unsettling questions about control, vulnerability, and self-worth. People began to see the signs of emotional abuse in a new light, not just physical violence, but the insidious psychological power that can be wielded by a partner, a parent, or even a close friend. Felix's actions, once seen by some as simply a jealous lover's passion, were now scrutinized as deliberate acts of manipulation, a man who used his charm and influence to mold and control Sofia in the most subtle, yet dangerous, ways. Sofia herself became a tragic symbol of how quickly life can unravel when one becomes too deeply intertwined in a relationship based on unhealthy dependence. But her story also sparked a crucial conversation on the limits of personal responsibility. Was she a victim of Felix's manipulation, or did she cross a line that ultimately led to a fatal choice? Could she have escaped without taking a life? Those were the questions that lingered long after the gavel fell. For Mateo Ramirez, the fallout from the trial was nothing short of devastating. He had lost both his father and his wife, the two people he loved most in the world, and yet, he found himself struggling to reconcile his memories of them. Felix, once a towering figure in his life, was now the antagonist in a tragic story, and his marriage to Sofia, a relationship he had believed to be solid, was shattered beyond repair. Mateo's decision to leave Los Angeles after the trial was not just about escaping the physical reminders of his broken family, but about trying to salvage his own sense of self. The man who had once been filled with ambition, poised to carry on the legacy of his family, found himself questioning everything he had built. His life, much like the family estate, now sat empty, a testament to the destruction that had followed in the wake of one woman's desperate need for love and validation. In the years that followed, Sophia's story continued to dominate the media landscape. News articles, documentaries, and even podcasts revisited the details of the case, dissecting every angle of the trial. Was Sophia a victim, manipulated into a corner she couldn't escape? Or was she a woman who used her emotional vulnerability to manipulate those around her? The public was torn, and as her story was retold, it sparked debates that lasted far beyond the courtroom. Social media, too, played a significant role in keeping her story alive. Hashtags like #Sophia Ramirez and #emotional manipulation became trending topics, drawing in viewers who wanted to explore the nuances of her case. In forums, people shared their own experiences of being emotionally manipulated, while others debated the ethics of her actions. As the public became more attuned to the emotional struggles that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives, Sophia's legacy became a focal point for deeper societal reflection. For many, the lessons from Sophia's story were clear: emotional abuse is real, and it can leave scars just as deep as physical wounds. Her case highlighted the need for more education around the signs of psychological manipulation, particularly in romantic relationships. It encouraged people to think critically about the relationships they were in, to evaluate whether they were truly based on mutual respect, or if one partner was subtly exerting control over the other. Yet, for all the discussions, the pain remained. Sophia had committed a crime, but the broader question remained: was her crime the result of a broken system that had failed to recognize her vulnerability? Was it the inevitable consequence of her emotional imprisonment under Felix's control? Or was it simply the tragic end of a story that could never have been happy, no matter the circumstances? Sophia's legacy, now etched into the fabric of society's collective consciousness, continued to spark debate long after her sentence began. Some saw her as a victim of a system that had failed to protect her, others saw her as a perpetrator who deserved to pay for her actions. And, ultimately, her story became a mirror through which society could examine its own failings, its own vulnerabilities, and the true meaning of love and justice. As the years passed and Sophia served her time, the questions surrounding her case never quite faded. What truly led to her choices? And what, if anything, could have been done to save her before it was too late? What do you think about Sophia's story? Was she a victim of emotional manipulation, or did she ultimately make a conscious choice to cross a line? Could this have been prevented? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Your opinion matters. Let's continue this conversation and explore the complexities of relationships, manipulation, and the choices we make in life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.